Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining. Roman's a product management expert who specializes in product strategy, product leadership, and agility. He's advised product leaders and taught lots of different product teams and product managers and product owners over the last 15 plus years. He's written 3 books on product management and has developed a range of product management frameworks, methods, and tools that help organizations achieve product success. When not supporting others and improving their product practices, you'll find Roman cycling, playing the tenor sax, and spending time with family, amongst many other pursuits. And I'm really excited to have Roman joining us today.
Thank you, Scott, and lovely to be here.
So I think just to encourage folks here to get going, feel free to pop your questions that you have for Roman around the topic of product strategy into our Q&A. Roman, maybe you can, just to warm things up a little bit, tell us a little bit about your journey into product. How did you get here? You got this interesting background, a degree in theoretical linguistics. I know you've had a little bit of the accidental journey, but maybe you can tell us just a little bit about that path into product.
Yeah, sure. How did I get into product management? So I guess like many other people, by accident, I started working during my studies as a software developer for a web startup back then, which was owned by a large German publishing company, and then moved on to Intel and worked in the UK and US as a software engineer, as a software developer, and then joined Siemens, and I joined their research and consulting group. It was like a centralized function, and our job was to, well, look into, explore new technologies, and then evangelize these technologies to the business groups, the product development teams. And as part of that work, I was working on a new healthcare product where we were called in originally to help with component technology challenges. But it turned out that wasn't the real issue. The real issue really was the process, the development process, and particularly product management. And so I ended up working with the lead product manager. And for me, that was a very beneficial, a very fruitful time. I learned a lot. Sadly, the product wasn't a success. It pretty much failed miserably. But for me, it was the first proper step into product management and the first real product management experience, exposure that I had. And yeah, I really enjoyed that. And I really felt that this is where that product management plays such a pivotal role in bringing new products to life and generally making products successful, that in the coming years, I just wanted to focus a little bit more on that area. And so, yeah, slowly moved further and further into product management, really. But I've never held the title of a product manager in any larger organization. But I've now run my own business for nearly, I think, 17 years. And so as part of that role, I look after most of the assets that we have within the business, the services that we offer, and the products that we've created. And so I try and practice what I preach, and I use my own work to experiment with new ideas. And yeah, so that's how I got into product management.
Oh, that's really interesting. It's unique that you haven't held maybe that title as part of your product journey, which is really fascinating. As we wait for some questions to come in here, the word strategy, I think for a lot of people in product, kind of conjures up a lot of stress and confusion. If you can put your simplicity and your kind of lens on this, how would you define it? And why do you think it's maybe vague or misunderstood by some people inside product?
Yeah, sure. Strategy itself, as you said, can be quite an ambiguous term. I like to really make it a little bit more precise by saying, let's talk about product strategy, because there are different types of strategy within an enterprise. So there's a business strategy. There might be a product portfolio strategy, and there's a product strategy. There might be a technology strategy. There might be other strategies. So when we talk about product strategy, for me, that is the approach that we're taking to make a product successful or keep it successful. That's the one-liner. That's for me the explanation of what for me a product strategy is. And another way to then approach product strategy is to position it and to look at the connections that a product strategy has. And for me, it's very beneficial to work with an overarching vision that is hopefully inspiring, that communicates the positive change we want to bring about. An example I like to use is if I want to develop a product that helps people become more aware of what they eat and how much they eat, then the vision might be healthy eating. And so the vision then is not only about achieving product success and describing a path to get there, but also a way to realize that vision and move closer towards that vision or realize that vision. And for me, the product strategy guides a product roadmap, and the product roadmap then describes how a product strategy is implemented. So I find it helpful to not look at the strategy as a separate plan just on its own in an isolated fashion, but understand what is it, or what is our meaning in a given organization, what is our meaning of product strategy, but then what is its connection to other product management plans. And then I've mentioned product portfolio strategy. How is it connected to a product portfolio strategy, and how is it connected to a business strategy? Again, clearly distinguishing those different types of plans. I find that very beneficial. And sometimes when people talk about product strategy, that doesn't happen. And then business strategy and a product strategy is mixed up. Sometimes that can be okay, particularly when we talk about early stage startups. But as a business starts to grow and starts to mature, I think it's again very beneficial to distinguish those different aspects and work with distinct separate plans, but keep them connected.
First question here from Ellen is, one of the most challenging aspects to strategic planning is turning the larger company vision and goals into product-centric KPIs. For example, a company goal might be to increase revenue in market X by Y%. But when she's working on her piece of the product, it isn't really necessarily revenue generating on its own. So how do you essentially drill down and come up with essentially or establish those measurable KPIs to determine success?
Yeah, nice question. And for me, that's exactly where a product strategy comes in, by describing, first of all, what is the value that the product should create for a group of users and possibly customers. So what's the needs, the primary needs that the product should address, or the main problem that it should solve, or the main benefit it should generate. So I was mentioning healthy eating as an example for a product vision, and then the specific benefit might be to help people reduce the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Or the specific benefit might be to help people lose weight and achieve their ideal weight. That might be an alternative benefit. And then the second element I'd be exploring within the context of a product strategy is, who are the users and are there any customers? And describe the user and customer group, the target group, the market segment in such a way that I can tell if somebody is included or somebody's not included, if somebody should benefit from the product, at least in the foreseeable future, or somebody shouldn't. And sometimes there are different segments that we can choose from, and then choose that group of people who's likely to benefit most from a given offering. And then the third element I'd be looking towards would be the standout features of the product. And that's particularly important for commercial revenue generating products. What sets a specific product apart from its competing offerings? It might be to stay with healthy eating. Maybe I should even go back and say target group for my healthy eating product might be middle-aged men like myself who've picked up unhealthy eating habits, maybe eat too much or the wrong stuff at the wrong time, who knows? And then standout features of such a product might be seamless integration with leading smart scales and smartwatches, and of course, machine learning, AI-based personalized eating recommendations. And another cool feature I just can't think of right now. I'm making this up, obviously. This is a sample. It's just a made-up example. Those are sample standout features. And then the fourth element, and that might be the one that helps answer the question, would be the business goals, the desired business benefits. So the value that the product should generate for the company that is developing and providing it. And if you work on a supporting product, a product that doesn't generate revenue directly, that isn't a commercial product, saying we're using Zoom here, that would be a commercial revenue generating product. You subscribe to Zoom, at least, if you want to run meetings with a larger audience or longer meetings. I'm not even aware exactly what the limitations these days are if you use the free version of Zoom, but so it's a revenue generating product. And in that case, of course, revenue would be an important target, or would be natural to say one of the business goals would be to generate a certain amount of revenue. But if you have a supporting product, a product that helps market and sell other revenue generating products, think about an app, a web app or mobile app for an online retailer, for instance, that helps market and sell other products, then the revenue generation may not be such a big deal. When if you work on a, say, internal product, an internal supporting product like an internal software platform, then it's not going to be relevant at all. Then your business goals are likely to be around reducing cost, increasing productivity, reducing time to market. It's really important to reflect on what kind of product do you manage? Who are the users and customers? Why will people want to use it? And then what is the value that the product creates for the business? And does it generate revenue? Does it generate revenue directly or indirectly? Or is it an internal supporting tech product like an internal software platform? There should always be, I would argue, a measurable impact to the business. You should always say and be able to ultimately describe and quantify what impact and what value is it that my product creates for my company, for my business. Ultimately, every product has to be a value creating vehicle. It has to create sufficient value for a group of people, users, possibly customers, and for the business. And that's important, the second part, because otherwise it won't be viable to continue investing in the product and to continue developing it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as Kagan talked about in his book, Inspired, the valuable and the viable are both critical pieces that we need to consider as PM for sure.
Yeah. I refer to those aspects as product success factors, and they go back to the book Change by Design, where the author talks about desirability, feasibility, and viability. And I suggest in my book Strategize to add a fourth factor, ethicality, because I feel these days, particularly when we talk about digital products, when we talk about software-based products, when we look at some of the business models that very popular digital products have, it's important to consider the impact the products have on the individual, society, and the planet. Four factors have to come together to really achieve sustained longer-term product success.
Roman, I'm going to ask maybe where do you see teams struggling with strategy, and maybe what are some of the, for lack of a better word, maybe the anti-patterns that come up again and again that block them from building out a strategy or developing a strategy effectively?
Yeah, great question. And so I'll have to kind of, it's a longish list. So a big obstacle to making effective strategic decisions is not being empowered to do, not having the authority to make strategic product decisions, but being very much focused on product delivery, execution, tactical, detailed product decisions. And that's not an uncommon experience for me. I've worked with a fair number of companies, even mid-sized companies, where ultimately the leadership team would determine the strategy of the product, certainly the revenue generating products, and the product people, the product managers, product owners weren't sufficiently empowered. So that's one thing. The second thing is sometimes product people are so busy that they struggle to make time for the strategy work. And the reason for that is that strategy is important, but it's not urgent. So sometimes as product managers and product owners, we optimize our work to tackle the urgent work. And the drawback with that is if we neglect strategic tasks, if we neglect product strategy, if we neglect product discovery, that we generate more unplanned urgent work in the future. And then sometimes it's also a lack simply in terms of having the right skills and the right tools and frameworks available to make the right strategic decisions. And maybe an element of confusion, what a product strategy is, something we touched upon earlier, and what kind of elements an effective product strategy should contain, or what kind of questions an effective strategy should answer. But yeah, I think really the empowerment one is a biggie. Just being in an environment where product people are very delivery focused, are told, get those features done.
Yeah. And you touched quite a bit on that in your book, which I think is really great to see. And particularly you talk there in the context of PMs needing to own that strategy and roadmap, but also be empowered to have a final say on essentially on the decisions. For those that are maybe fighting that battle on both the influence and leadership side, and also maybe extracting that empowerment from their organizations? What are ways in which you've found or seen success with teams on that end?
Yeah, it's another great question. So the really interesting thing with product people, product managers, product owners, whatever our job title might be, is that we lack what's referred to as positional power. Somebody who works as, say, as a line manager, like a head of product, a head of development, head of sales, the CEO, they all have that positional power. They can tell people what to do, and they have, to a certain extent, the ability to control people due to their position, due to the office, so to speak, that they hold, the position that they're in. And that's not the case for us product people. So we have what's referred to as emergent power, and it's emergent leadership that we practice. We are emergent leaders, and that is very much built on trust. And trust, again, is built on our ability to empathize with development teams, stakeholders, and sponsor, key people in the organization, our ability to actively listen to them, attentively listen to people with the intention to understand, having the right expertise. It's hard for people to trust us if we don't know our stuff, if we lack the relevant understanding of the market, the user needs, maybe some of the key technologies that are typically used to build product in the relevant product category. Yeah, and acting with, I would argue, integrity and being accountable and doing what we say we do, and follow through our commitments. So I think there's a number of elements that help build trust. And if my recommendation to anybody who feels I'm not empowered enough is to first and foremost think about, what about the trust that people have in me, and would it be beneficial for me to strengthen relationships and do some trust building? Because that's something you can do, and you can do immediately by empathizing with people, by actively listening to people, and so forth. And then the second thing is much more challenging. I find it's an organizational element. If you work in an organization where product management is not fully established, or where the product management maturity is pretty low, maybe you're transitioning from a more project-driven environment to a more product-led, a product-focused way of working, then it's natural that the level of empowerment isn't as high or as strong as you'd like it to be. And maybe there's an element of confusion amongst the stakeholders, what kind of decisions you're ultimately allowed to make, and what their role is in the strategic decision-making processes. And so then I think it's a question of being a little bit patient and having some perseverance, showing some perseverance, and in influencing people and lobbying for the appropriate change. I'd also like to say that if you find that you are being given a strategy without the ability to influence, or you're not even consulted, you're not even able to comment, and you're just expected to execute, then you have to ask yourself if that is a job you want to do on a longer term basis. And maybe the answer is yes, maybe the answer is no. For me, product managers should have, generally speaking, what I call full stack ownership. They should not only own the detailed product decisions and product delivery, but also the product strategy. And I think it's not fair to say to somebody, you should maximize the value a product creates, and now write some user stories and make sure they get implemented properly. No, that's more like a project manager's job than a product manager's job, I would argue.
Question from David. Do you have advice on working with a CEO that's gone all in on all-consuming development? So in his particular scenario, the majority of the leadership team has been willing to accept the CEO's commitment to the effort for years at the expense of all revenue-generating opportunities. Any kind of tools, approaches, things that you might do here to help them see the light before it's too late?
Yeah, it's a good question. I once worked with a client where one of the teams I was working with was simply no longer available Monday morning when I showed up. And it's like, well, where's everyone? what have people got? And it turned out the CEO had come in a little bit earlier and just nicked people and said, okay, you've been reassigned. I've had this great idea over the weekend. This isn't the new product we'll be working on from now on. Didn't tell anyone. Yeah, it happens. What can you do? I think that the best thing I guess I can suggest is try and collect the relevant empirical evidence, the right data that backs up your view and shows the CEO that maybe their approach is not necessarily the most beneficial one. A standard way to develop a strategy, certainly create an initial strategy, will be to formulate the product strategy and then to systematically look at key assumptions or key risks and then address those assumptions and risks. And that's referred to as validating the product strategy, testing the product strategy, making sure that the statements in the product strategy are based on data, are based on empirical evidence, and there is not a risk that we've got this great sounding strategy that results in complete product failure, but that we do the best we can initially with as little effort and time as possible to drive out uncertainty, at least, enough that we're confident, yeah, we've nailed it, that's the right strategy, and we've got data to show that it's likely to be effective. It'd be great maybe to attempt that, at least to a certain extent, or possibly influence the CEO to be open to go through that process and say, sounds like an amazing idea, sounds like a great idea, can we write this down? Let's maybe use the various tools you can use to write down a product strategy, including my product vision board. Use one of those templates, use one of those tools, write it down, and then say, oh, can we now look at how certain we are that we've chosen the right target group, that the needs that we've identified or the problem that we've identified is strong enough, and so forth. And do we have any relevant data to back up our views? And if that's not the case, should we maybe do some surveys? Should we maybe interview some users? Should we maybe directly observe users? Should we maybe do a little bit competitor research and competitive analysis? Should we maybe look at the underlying business model that we use, and if that business model really is solid enough to support this new product? That's the approach I would suggest. Ultimately, I would hope that the CEO just doesn't continue to act that way, but becomes aware that a more collaborative approach might be appropriate. And ultimately, the CEO, together with the leadership team, should probably focus on business strategy and ensuring that there is an effective plan that says, this is how we will grow the business, this is how we will move the business forward and make or keep the business successful, and then leave the product strategy to the professionals, to the specialists, to the product people.
Another question here from Laura. When you have many connected products within an ecosystem, say an e-commerce situation or retail, or many PMs working together in a SaaS product, how many strategies is too many strategies?
So I generally recommend to have one product strategy per product. It goes back then to saying, okay, how do we identify a product? How do we define a product? And for me, as I briefly mentioned earlier, a product is a revenue generating vehicle. So it's something that generates largely on its own, I would argue, a sufficient value for a group of people, at least users, and for the business. And so it's worthwhile to go through the exercises, particularly in larger enterprises, to really look at particularly software assets and ask yourself, is that asset, is it a product or is it part of a product? Is it maybe an end user facing capability, a product feature? Is it maybe more an architecture building block, like a component? And I wouldn't create a strategy for a product capability or feature or component or another form of architecture building block, but really focus a product strategy on the product level. And then sometimes what can be very beneficial is when you have a product portfolio or product suite, a group of products, particularly related products. Take a productivity tool like, say, Microsoft Office or the Google productivity tools that hopefully many of us are familiar with. It might make sense then, at least for some of those products that are particularly closely related, say like Microsoft Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, to consider creating an overarching strategy. Or at least aligning the individual strategies, harmonizing them, because particularly in the case of Microsoft, those products are bundled. You can only subscribe to them as a package. I'd then explore, would it be worthwhile to create a higher level overarching strategy for those three products particularly?
Yeah. So opportunities to maybe like individually per product build a strategy, but also to coalesce cross-functionally across different product teams or product areas to look at the opportunities maybe for synergies or cross collaboration inside those strategies.
Yeah, absolutely, particularly for those products that are related, that have dependencies that are bundled. The same is obviously then true for the product roadmaps, but I'd start with the strategies.
Roman, tell me how this approach is different, particularly when you've got an existing product that you're coming into that maybe has a bit of history or background in it that people have anchored around versus maybe like defining a new product. And so if you're like, how would you approach those differently if you were a new PM coming into a company when you're given one kind of path versus maybe the other?
Yeah, that's another great question, Scott. So when you take on an existing product, then my recommendation is really sit down with the key stakeholders and development team representatives and look at the product strategy and look at if it clearly articulates why people would want to use this product, who those individuals are, what makes that product special in one way or another, and what its business goals are. So that's the first thing. If that strategy doesn't exist, and sometimes that's the case, that people have at least vague understanding of those elements, but it's not really anywhere captured in any meaningful way, in any structured format, then get together with the key stakeholders and development team members or representatives and sit down, be it on site or be it online, and go through the process of saying, okay, who do we believe the users and customers are? Why do we think people use our product? And so forth. And then take the next step and say, okay, and what is the data that we have in order to back up our view? Is there data? And then the third step for me would be to say, now, if this is now a valid strategy that we've captured, is it still the right strategy to move forward? Because ultimately your strategy should always be a forward-looking plan. It should always allow you to be proactive. It should always allow you to understand how to progress your product, how to move it forward. Only because the strategy has been helpful and valid for the past, say, 2-3 years, it doesn't mean it's going to be stay valid for the next 2 to 3 years. So I then really look at things like the product performance over the past few months, look at the appropriate metrics and KPIs, look at market trends, including technology trends, relevant regulatory trends, general consumer trends. I look at the business strategy to assess, is the current strategy still valid or would it benefit from being adapted? So that's another mistake I sometimes see people make, is to think, yeah, that's the way it maybe used to be 20, 30 years ago, maybe still is for certain non-software products, non-digital products, very big, very hardware-centric products where you create the strategy once and then the same strategy is being executed for an extended period of time. But certainly in the digital space, I would think of a strategy as something that has an adaptive quality or nature that is, I don't want to say fluid, but isn't fixed and static in any way. So it needs to be regularly reviewed and adapted. That should be the norm, certainly for as long as a product is youngish or as long as there are significant or enough changes that affect the product, be it market changes, be it technology changes, be it both. Yeah, that's what I would do. And that might mean that you have to amend, adapt the existing product strategy or create a brand new one, depending on what is appropriate. And it's not too dissimilar with a brand new product, only that there is no existing strategy. You have to bootstrap that strategy. You have to create it from scratch. And in order to do that, my recommendation is to do just enough upfront research and discovery. And different people use discovery in somewhat different terms. For me, product discovery is a little bit more than saying what should be built. For me, that sort of also entails in really understanding, is there an opportunity, and do a little bit of initial upfront market research, understand which market segments, which user and customer groups could we possibly reach out, what other players are in this space that we want to address. Just enough so you can create an initial good enough product strategy. So a strategy that I would call testable, where you can actually assess the statements and see if there's uncertainty. And so such a strategy has to be sufficiently specific. If you have a very vague strategy, then that strategy is hard to assess. It's hard to validate. It's hard to test. There's just so much uncertainty. So, it's in a case of iterating over it and maybe doing a little bit, as I said, more upfront market research, discovery work, just to get to this initial specific enough strategy. So you can then do your risk assessment, your hypotheses identification, and then go through the list of risks and hypotheses and address them one by one, and that way test and validate your product strategy. Once you've got this, then that puts you in a great position to derive your product roadmap and move into product development.
It's interesting because I like what you mentioned there of like just sitting down and having that conversation, and how valuable that can be often when you're entering a new product team, even to see the deltas between this part of the organization saying this and this part of the organization saying this, and to get yourself collectively back on the same page about where you're going and where you're going to play and the audience you're going to serve and the work that you're going to go do. When I think about my own product journey, many times I've maybe skipped that step and jumped right into the delivery side versus actually thinking a little bit about where are we going and why are we going there, and if that's important to do. So that was definitely super, super helpful in thinking about things. You talked a little bit in the book about the importance, obviously, of creating a strategy, but in particularly around the advantages around time boxing the effort, both around putting that strategy together as well as maybe validating the strategy that you've built. Can you talk about like just what advantage compression of time maybe has on strategy overall and how it can benefit a team?
Yeah, sure. It's one thing to say, oh, you should really create a strategy and you should really make sure that strategy is solid, and I'm confident you've put the right pieces of information down. Then ideally you should have some empirical evidence data to back it up. But if I'm the CEO or if I'm the sponsor and I'm interested in understanding, okay, how long is that going to take? How big is that effort going to be? How much is that going to cost? Just that initial piece of work. Some people have to do this. It might even be a collaborative effort. Several people have to be involved. Oh my God. And it's a little bit a question of how long is a piece of string, particularly if it's a new product and particularly if there's a significant amount of uncertainty, innovation, newness. And whenever that's the case, personally, I've found time boxing to be a very effective technique to focus and structure the work. And the general rule of thumb that I like to suggest is to limit strategy validation efforts to 1 month. And if you shoot for 1 month, then break it down into essentially weekly cycles. You could say validation iterations, where at the end of each week, you get back together. And maybe I should say that when I say you get back together, the person in charge of the product, possibly other product people that work on that product, the key stakeholders and development team representatives. So we haven't talked about it, I believe, but for me, strategizing is best done as a team effort, as a collaborative effort that is led by the overall product manager, overall product owner, the person in charge of the product. So that you then, at the end of each week, you look back at your product strategy and you see how has it changed? Have we managed to resolve uncertainties, address assumptions, address risks? Have new ones evolved? Are we ready to move on? Have we sufficiently validated? Have we sufficiently de-risked the strategy? Or are we at a stage now that we have to say the strategy as we've conceived it is unlikely to work out? It's wrong. We have to pivot. Think about sort of famous pivots. What can I think of? YouTube. YouTube started as a dating website and pivoted to a video sharing platform. That's what made it successful. Sometimes that's necessary, a pretty significant big strategy change in order to be able to move forward. And if you find that a month is not enough time, and if it's a very innovative development effort, and if it involves maybe also to a certain extent developing some of the underlying technologies, then that might be the case. Then at the end of that time box, you have to ask yourself, is it worthwhile to add another time box? Maybe just another 1 week or 2 week time box? Or should we say, We've done our best within a month to validate the strategy. Maybe we've even pivoted once or twice, but still with the current strategy, there's so many open questions, so many risks. Maybe then it's best to kill the innovation initiative right there, right then, and look for a different idea. It's a funny one because I think sometimes for various reasons that there's the stigma around failure. And it's partly, I think, individually that we are sometimes driven and we're attached to ideas and we identify with ideas and we take failure personal. And we don't want to fail for those reasons. And sometimes it's the environment, it's the work, in a way, culture or the work environment we're in, where that emphasizes flawless execution and not making mistakes and be successful. And then those two things can come together, and then we shy away from actually killing innovation initiatives at an early stage. But I remember a great talk by Rich Mirnoff he gave a number of years back at Product Camp London, where he rightly said that it's part and parcel of our work as product managers, and we should not be ashamed of killing our darling products, but to a certain extent, not necessarily be proud of it, but say that is part of our job. And if it's the right thing to do to kill a product at an early stage during validating a strategy, or possibly we've launched it, but the uptake is poor and it continues to be poor, even though we play around with different marketing measures. We maybe for a commercial product play around with the price, and we maybe improve some of the features, maybe we add a new feature, but still it's pretty flat in terms of the growth. Maybe we then again have to be honest to ourselves and say, like, what are the chances to make this product successful? Let's kill it and let's free up time, energy, and money to do something maybe more beneficial.
Another question here: when the direction of your products may be a bit foggy, or when you've maybe got leadership with lots of conflicting strategies as to what matters most, how do you ensure that the team is working on and prioritizing the most meaningful work?
Yeah, it's really about several products. Then, I would say the issue lies with what I would call product portfolio management. It's one thing to manage an individual product, but often products don't exist in isolation. We briefly touched upon this earlier when we talked about say a productivity suite like Microsoft Office. And so it can be very beneficial to establish a portfolio management approach where you not only aim to maximize the value of individual products, but you aim to maximize the value a group of products creates. And sometimes it makes sense to have a dedicated product portfolio manager that carries out that work. And that means also thinking about what is the growth potential of individual offerings and what are the business benefits that they are generating at present, or for commercial revenue generating product, what's the revenue that they're currently creating, and working with a tool like the product portfolio matrix. It used to be called the growth share matrix. And that helps then make the right strategic decisions for individual product, provides the right context. It helps make the right funding decisions, how much money, how big a budget individual products should receive, how much they should be progressed. If products, say, should be revitalized and go through a life cycle extension, or if it would be better to allow a product to become a cash cow, for instance, in order to achieve a balanced portfolio. And as I said, maximize the overall value that a group of products create and have a healthy cash flow across that portfolio, across that group. But again, a product portfolio management approach has to be driven by a meaningful business strategy. So I guess that's the thing to consider. Do you have an effective business strategy in place that clearly communicates that's the aspiration of the business? These are the markets that you want to address. These are the competitive advantages that you have as a business. And maybe these are specific capabilities that you have to create or strengthen. And maybe there are specific management systems that you need in order to succeed. So if that's not in place, I think then it'll be very hard to come up with something like a meaningful product portfolio management approach or a product portfolio strategy. And then again, that'll make it very hard to come up with effective individual product strategies. So it goes back to what I said earlier, that it'd be a mistake to look at product strategy as something that is completely isolated from other strategic plans in the enterprise. It isn't. It is connected in a meaningful way. And if you don't have a business strategy, then it's very hard to make the right strategic decisions for individual products.
In those kind of situations, maybe we don't have a business strategy, or maybe that business strategy isn't completely clear. Can product help influence that kind of bottoms up?
Yeah, I think so. The question is really, what is the position of product within the organization, and how strong in a way is product management? I would hope in a fairly healthy organization that the head of product, director of product, VP of product, depending on the org structure and the size of the organization, but the person who essentially runs the overall product management organization is part of the leadership team, and hence actively involved in shaping the business strategy and discusses business strategy with the product management contributors, with the product people that do the actual product work and manage the individual product, so they can feed back and they can influence that way. If that's not the case, then I think product people are still in a good position to raise awareness at the C-level that something like a clearly articulated business strategy would be beneficial, and what is the risk if there isn't one, and B, make suggestions what they're looking for in terms of these are some of the key elements of pieces of information that we would need in order to help us make the right strategic decisions for our products and ensure that our products create as much value as possible for the users, but also for the entire business.
This is super, super helpful, Roman. I'm going to end with maybe one question, a little unrelated to strategy, but thinking about your book in particular, Strategize, which we've had an opportunity to read here in our book club over the last quarter. I know the book's gone through a couple editions so far, but how has the content and maybe your thinking evolved through those two editions? And has anything really for you shifted dramatically in terms of your thinking around the approach to product strategy and the way in which product teams can be successful here? Or have you found more it's been like an iterative journey through that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think for me, it's more a process of refinement and clarifying my own thinking, elaborating my own thinking and my own the strategizing approach that I suggest. An example would be the strategy model or framework that I describe at the beginning of the book. That loosely existed in the first edition, but I didn't articulate it in quite that way for two reasons. One is because I was worried that it might be seen as being too prescriptive. And I don't like to tell people this is the way. I like to offer a way, but I really do believe that different products and different organizations just call for somewhat different approaches. There is no single one right way to make strategic decisions. There is no one right way to product management, to do product management. And then the second reason is, as I said, that my own thinking, I think, has just become clearer and in a way more refined. There are some changes that I've made. I've strengthened, I think, the collaborative aspects of my strategy approach. And I think I've offered more help around techniques to help people make strategic decisions together. And that was influenced by the work I did around leadership practices for product people and the leadership book that I wrote. So that in a way has benefited my strategy work and my strategy book. And then I've generally tried to bring it more in line with being very much goal and outcome focused. For me, the vision is a form of outcome, and then the strategy contains two types of outcomes: needs, user, customer goals, you could say, and the business goals. And then I used to talk about release goals in the context of the product roadmap. And then from pretty soon after the first edition was published, in fact, I think from 2017-18 onwards, I started talking about product goals. And other people have started to talk about product goals, and even the latest edition of the Scrum Guide talks about product goals. So I felt there's a real opportunity there to harmonize in a way, or standardize the language that I use and some of the concepts, the terms that I use throughout the book. But it's funny because some people said to me, "Oh, why did you update the book?" And I said, why not? The first edition was quite good, right? And I said, yeah, but the second one is better. So for me, there was an opportunity to make it better. There was an opportunity to update it. And so I took that opportunity. I was fortunate to have the opportunity, but I'm pleased that I spent time and effort creating a second edition. And in the end, it was more time and effort that I spent than I intended. I thought it'd be more like smaller incremental enhancements and refinements. And I ended up rewriting a good half of the book. But again, as I said, for me personally, it was worth it.
Yeah. Thank you, Roman. I really do appreciate the time today. It was wonderful to talk with you. I appreciate wonderfully disarming candor that I think would be great in any product team. And I hope we can all bring some of that approach, that collaborativeness, as you talked about, and that participatory kind of engagement to our work and strategy. And I really do appreciate everything that you've shared with us today on this topic.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. Thank you. And thanks for having me. I hope it was a little bit useful for everyone who's watched, everyone who's listened. And yeah, good luck with your strategic decisions and your product strategies.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think we'll just wrap things up here quickly. We do have a post-event survey. We'd love to get your feedback on this. We'd love to get your feedback and encourage you to continue the conversation and discussion. If you've got things that you want to know related to strategy, questions, our community is a great place to ask that question and get help from other people in terms of your challenges and situations that you might be dealing with. We've got lots of other community events coming up this week. We've got Tom Kerwin on Thursday. Next week, we've got Mark Rennie joining us. And we also have our Supercharge Your Product Team mini conference coming up. Lots of different makers talking about lots of different topics about how they're challenging and supercharging their teams and working collaboratively and executing faster in these particularly difficult macroeconomic times. And if you do want to get engaged as a speaker or talk or share some of your experiences like Roman did with us today, feel free to let us know. We'd love to have you. And with that, again, thank you, Roman. Really appreciate you taking the time and enjoy the rest of your week. And thanks everybody for joining us. Take care.